Welcome to another episode of Gaslighting, the Warfighter podcast, brought to you by the Grunt Style Foundation. I'm your host, Monica Adams, and today we stand at a pivotal moment in our community's history. We're witnessing an inspiring display of bipartisan cooperation aimed at confronting one of the most devastating crises in our nation, the opioid epidemic in the veteran community. With $50 billion from legal settlements with pharmaceutical companies beginning to flow to state and local governments, the question of how to best utilize these funds to heal our communities is more pressing than ever. Kentucky, a state with one of the highest opioid overdose death rates, is poised to receive over $800 million. Now, among the proposals for these funds is a bold and controversial consideration, supporting research into Ibogaine, an illegal psychedelic drug, as a potential treatment for addiction. To navigate this complex and polarizing topic, we're joined by a panel of distinguished guests. Bryan Hubbard, who has been at the forefront of proposing Ibogaine research funding, Senator Holly Thompson Rader, Representative Aaron McMullen, Tim Jensen, and lobbyist Ethan Thampey, each bringing their unique insights and the potential benefits and challenges of Ibogaine treatment.
Grunt Style Foundation is proud to be at the tip of the spear in supporting those who serve in our military community. Your donation directly supports food insecurity initiatives, transition and sustainment programs, mental health and wellness, and keeping our veterans from becoming homeless. You can be part of the solution and be the help a veteran or service member needs today.
A very powerful conversation. Both Tim and Bryan, thank you for joining us on this. The opioid crisis run rampant in the world, and we all need to figure out what is it that we can do about it. I'm going to start with Bryan and talk about the impact of the overuse of opioids, first of all, the overprescription of it, and what it's done to our brain. Can we start there?
We sure can, and thank you, Tim, and thank you, Monica, for having me as a guest here with you this afternoon. The opioid epidemic in America broadly, and specifically in Kentucky, is the greatest engineered humanitarian catastrophe that has fallen on our society since the end of the 19th century. Beginning with the introduction of OxyContin into central and southern Appalachia in 1996, we have seen what is now 28 years of generationally compounding carnage that is exhibited by what has been 3 record-breaking years of hundreds of thousands of deaths related to opioid dependence throughout our society. I began this road to knowledge of Ibogaine in my capacity as the former chairman and executive director of the Kentucky Opioid Abatement Advisory Commission. The companies which have been legally responsible for the creation of this epidemic have had to pay the piper in the form of settlement agreements with all 50 states, each one receiving its own share, for the purposes of combating the effects of this scourge. Kentucky was due to receive $842 million over 15 years, and the question became, what would we do with that money given the fact that it was a one-time, scarce resource when measured against the magnitude of the problem to make a measurable difference over the long haul? Given the tremendous amount of death that we see year after year, despite the very best efforts to expend significant resource and effort to combat the effects of the opioid epidemic, our existing treatment options have consistently delivered unacceptably mediocre results. So when thinking about the way in which Kentucky needed to strategically use its settlement funds, I advised then Attorney General Daniel Cameron that we needed to look for Kentucky's Manhattan Project opportunity to use a small percentage of its settlement funds to pioneer the development of a breakthrough therapeutic that could deliver us materially better results than those we were receiving with our existing treatment models, those being abstinence-based or 12-step programs, and then medically assisted treatment programs which rely upon opioid replacement therapies in the form of methadone and Suboxone to essentially deal with the most intractable part of opioid dependence, which is opioid withdrawal. When an individual becomes opioid dependent, their brain's survival chemicals in the form of dopamine and serotonin become inactive in the absence of the presence of ever-escalating dosages of opioids. Whereas an individual might look at an opioid-dependent individual as being criminally depraved because of the behavior they exhibit in seeking the medication, the reality is we are looking at the behavior of a neurochemically injured individual whose brain cannot produce the very baseline survival chemicals it needs to survive in the absence of the pills. Suboxone and methadone are effective treatments for about 22% of folks who receive them. And they are effective because they are opioids and they prevent the onset of withdrawal. The problem is for individuals who take those medications that if they're going to remain effective, they must be on them virtually the rest of their lives, unless they can figure out a way to titrate down, something which is a daunting prospect, which is why 80% of Suboxone patients drop out after 6 months from the initiation of treatment. Through just independent personal curiosity about the psychedelic renaissance, which began in 2018 with the discovery of psilocybin's effects on alcoholism, treatment-resistant depression and anxiety, I came across an author who I reached out to in July of 2022, 3 months after I accepted the job. Her name was Juliana Christina, and she wrote a Substack publication called The Journey, and it was all about her own personal use of psilocybin mushrooms and how they had helped her resolve her lifelong issues with anxiety, depression, and an almost fatal eating disorder. She was the first individual on July the 29th of 22 to speak the word Ibogaine into my ears. I had never heard of it before. Ibogaine is an alkaloid which is derived from a West African plant called the iboga root. It also comes from 2 other botanical sources that grow in the root bark of trees in West Africa. They grow plentifully and they grow quickly. The iboga root takes 5 to 10 years to come into maturation and is an endangered botanical. Making sure that there is a sustainable supply if this were to become available in the West is important. However, what makes Ibogaine so compelling is the way that it works at a 3-dimensional level within the human being. First of all, whereas an individual must be abstinent from opioids for at least 18 months before their brain begins to recover its normal neurochemical processes with the production of dopamine and serotonin, through a single dose administration, Ibogaine restarts the brain's organic dopamine and serotonin production and restores the brain to its pre-opioid stasis within 36 hours for 80% of individuals who receive it. That number goes up to 97% after the administration of a second supportive dose. So you have an alkaloid which has a dramatic breakthrough potential to fully resolve the neurochemical brain injury caused by opioid dependence within 36 hours. You also have a substance which works in a psychological way upon the opioid-dependent individual who, according to those who have received the treatment, specifically for opioid dependence, creates the restoration of a sense of individual autonomy and ownership over self, self's choices, and self's future. That reacquisition of ownership of life and ownership of self is key into motivating long-term recovery behavior that is necessary to be maintained over the long haul. And perhaps the most compelling thing for me personally was, or what is, described as the spiritual dimension of Ibogaine. I personally believe that the opioid epidemic is but the most visible and tragic symptom of profound spiritual affliction that affects the United States of America. That spiritual affliction is rooted in our disconnection from our individual divinity as images of an almighty creator in whose image we are made. According to individuals who receive Ibogaine treatment, they come away with an affirmation that they are absolutely the children of that creator and that that creator's essence is pure and unconditional love for them as an individual who also has special and unique purpose for their life. That spiritual awakening to the divinity that resides within each of us by virtue of our status as human beings and the fact that we have an almighty maker who has love and purpose for us is fundamental to the full restoration of the human being that's necessary to pursue a happy and productive life. And for all these reasons, I told then Attorney General Cameron if he would give me the ability and latitude to pursue an announcement whereby we would look to set aside just 10% of the Commission's funds to create a framework for the research of Ibogaine for purposes of having an FDA-approved therapeutic developed, that I would stake my career and my reputation on it. If it failed, I'd take the fall, and if it succeeded, he could have the glory. Due to circumstances we'll discuss, that project has changed in nature, but that commitment remains the same. It is the very best therapeutic opportunity that we have to bring real change to an epidemic that must be confronted, and confronted with effectiveness by any and all humanitarian means necessary.
Powerful, obviously, and as Bryan just said, and we're all sitting here saying he hadn't heard about Ibogaine since 2022. I had never until we started to put this all together. But you're hearing all these profound impacts that it could have on the public, but a lot in the veteran world, and that's where we bring Tim into play. You hear all of this, you hear the passion behind Bryan, and we know that this exists, as well as other, and you talked about psilocybin, there's other things on multiple levels that would be able to help, and I know it frustrates you. We've done series in the past, but it frustrates you that there's this stopgap, right? Nope, we're not going to push this through. We're going to talk about what happened in Kentucky coming up in just a bit, but Tim, after hearing all that, how do you summarize what's going through your heart, your spirit, your brain?
Well, it's very difficult for me to process, Monica, because it goes against a lot of the things that I've come to understand in growing up and living within the confines of the United States. And this existential crisis that we find ourselves in, right? Because at the end of the day, and all the research that I've done, what I've come to truly understand is, our medical system is in the process of treating the symptom and driving for profit.
Not the root.
Not the root at all, right? And let's put it in a bit of a perspective for those that are listening. When we think about this opioid epidemic in the United States of America, and Bryan alluded to the engineering of it, and I would go a step further in the manufacturing of this epidemic. It goes back to the 1960s with a very distinct company called Rickett and Coleman, right? That company comes into the United States and starts producing opioids in Lexington, Kentucky, and starts proliferating that all across the United States, right? And getting people hooked onto this, what is being sold at that time as a medicine. During that time period, what people don't really understand is they were testing this new medicine on the inmates of the state of Kentucky. When the efficacy of this was proven, that it does provide some pain relief and things of that nature, they go to market, right? And then they find out that all these people are getting addicted to these things. Right? I can remember my addiction to Percocet when I was in the military, right? A hard opiate that is destructive in so many ways. And then this brilliant idea of saying, oh my gosh, we have all these people that are addicted to opioids. We need to do something. So what does the pharmaceutical companies do? They come up with the cure, right? And it's another manufactured opioid. So we're going to treat an opioid epidemic with another opioid, a sublingual that you take in your mouth, and you're going to have to be on this for the rest of your life, right? So during the testing of this, and Rickett and Coleman have changed their names several times in between, for legal reasons of criminal nature, right? They have been held accountable for bad marketing. Their CEO was fined and put into prison, and the company was fined at nearly $600 million. During that same time period, they're testing no longer on the Kentucky inmates, because the state of Kentucky said that is not something that they can do, right? So they need to find a new sample group. And where do they go? They're shopping around, and they land on the doorsteps of the VA. And the VA says, yes, we have a whole group of individuals that are opioid dependent. Let's give them this idea and this pharmaceutical called Suboxone and start treating them for this, this addiction that they have. Right?
How do you feel about that? From them saying no to inmates, but yes, let's do it with the veterans.
It's criminal. Yeah. It's absolutely criminal. And it's destroying the very understanding of what our commitment is to the people that are willing to raise their hand and go and fight for this country. And then are assured that the medical program that they are allowed and is built for them is being a place of lab rats. Yeah. It's unacceptable. And it's killing us. Right, we have to make a difference, right? So and it gets a little bit further, right? As we walk down this path, right? So Suboxone becomes a thing, It's, in the time period of 2021, I believe it is, only 160,000 doctors in the United States are able to prescribe Suboxone to patients, for its use. Lobbyists working on behalf of the new company called Indivior, right? They go to Washington, D.C. and they do their job. And the next thing you know, in 2022, when there's a big merger where Suboxone is now having a complementary inhalant that will do the same thing, would deliver opioids into the system, over 3 million doctors are now allowed to write scripts for these medicines. And at the same time period, there's a huge windfall of profits as Indivior racks up the billions of dollars as these medicines are being delivered across the United States for this opioid epidemic. And we look out our windows and we see our family members, our loved ones, walking around like zombies on the street, homeless, who can't even gain access to this idea of Suboxone, nor notwithstanding it, I wouldn't even give this to anybody. But they have no access to this stuff. And this epidemic is getting deeper and it's destroying lives across the United States. When are we going to say it's enough? I think the time is now. And I certainly I'm tired of seeing it within the veteran community.
Well, and as the general public, you just mentioned it, because yes, they get homeless, you see them holding the signs, and you know that the general public's thoughts are, oh, that's not real. We're not going to help them. We can't trust that. Just drive on. Everyone's turning the deaf ear, a blind eye to it, but that's why we're here today. Really groundbreaking, whistleblowing to say, as Tim just said, as Bryan just said, enough is enough. The overprescribing. This isn't working, let's prescribe the next thing. I mean, that's the frustration part, right, Bryan? This isn't, they've got to be switched around a little bit. Let's prescribe another opioid. Let's just overprescribe, and then we haven't even begun to talk about the effects that happen, the suicidal thoughts that happen, and then that being brushed under the rug and just dismissed.
There's a gentleman by the name of Patrick Radden Keefe who wrote a book called Empire of Pain, which is an exhaustive history of the Sackler family, the creation of Purdue Pharma, and everything that Purdue Pharma did to help engineer and manufacture the situation that we currently find ourselves in. Mr. Keefe quotes another author whose name I cannot recall toward the very beginning of that book, and he observes that the history of opioids within the human existence is one that involves the tragic repetition of history. So when we look at the creators of our circumstances, those that have just paid $50 billion to 50 different states for their role in the creation of the opioid epidemic, I can say with certainty that those very same companies, as they wrote the checks, felt very assured that through any measure of public benefits through Medicare, Medicaid, third-party payor systems which cover medically assisted treatment, as well as a very concerted effort to make proposals to advance medically assisted treatment through the acquisition of settlement funds at the individual state levels. They are very confident that they're going to get every bit of this money back on the back end, almost as much as what they put up on the front end. How do we know that? Because the creators of the problem are also those that are manufacturing its ostensible evidence-based best practices treatment. I'll use the state of Kentucky as an example of one of the barriers that we came up against that I consider to be hard and fast when it came to opposition to the Ibogaine initiative. Between January 1 of 2017 and October 31st of 2023, Kentucky Medicaid, which services a state of 4.6 million people, Kentucky Medicaid paid for over 110 million doses of Suboxone and had been billed over $1 billion by the pharmaceutical industry which produces that therapeutic. At the same time, 3 of those 5 years saw record overdoses and record deaths despite the promulgation of that medication.
Again, we are looking as a community of what can we do about this. We alluded earlier to some changing of the guard. We alluded to the fact that Bryan was with the commission. He's no longer. What happened with all of that? And why is this continuing to be pushed under the rug and nothing being done about it? What can we do in the state of Missouri? This is all the things that we'll be talking about. If you want to have an effort in this as a general public, we ask you to go to the foundation's website, gruntstylefoundation.org. Continue to follow these series. Donate donate to continue to advance everything that they're trying to do. I want to go deeper into what's happened in Kentucky, and we'll talk again deeper into Ibogaine. Again, going a little bit more in depth into what is Ibogaine and how is it helping? Are trials in the near future? Could we, as a state of Missouri, possibly move things through? All of that we'll discuss when we return.
Grunt Style Foundation is a nonprofit organization dedicated to serving and supporting America's military community. With a focus on veteran and active duty service members, the Grunt Style Foundation provides resources for mental and physical wellness, food insecurities, transition and sustainment, and veteran homelessness. Join Grunt Style in their mission to give back to those who sacrifice so much for our country. Visit their website today at gruntstylefoundation.org to ensure no veteran is left behind.
So it's really interesting, Bryan. I was looking at a lot of national news stories that were talking about all this forward momentum that was happening in Kentucky, and then like a screeching halt, the changing of the guard, Attorney General changes, and you're no longer with the commission, and then it stops. So can we go into that?
We sure can, and let me begin by saying to my fellow commission members who were supportive of our initiative, as well as the veterans and the veteran-related groups that came in to support our Kentucky effort, from front to back, we had a fabulously successful campaign to introduce an unknown subject that had significant controversy risk to a deeply politically conservative and religiously fundamentalist state in a way that not just introduced and educated the public on the topic, but ended up generating significant grassroots enthusiasm across the board in what I would consider to be a critical majoritarian way for the purposes of making Ibogaine available for everyone who would choose to benefit from its therapeutic effects. We had a public announcement where we laid out the initiative on May the 31st. We had 3 5-hour public hearings, one of which was devoted to the science of Ibogaine, the second of which was devoted to the lived experiences of those who had received, provided, or had sent loved ones for Ibogaine treatment. And then the third related to whether the FDA would even approve an Ibogaine trial, given the fact that there are true and genuine cardiac risks associated with the administration of the treatment. When looked at in their totality, those hearings were of congressional level quality in terms of both the poignancy, the content, and the expertise that was brought to bear to illuminate Ibogaine's promise. We had one critical piece of due diligence to conduct, and that was to bring back Dr. Nolan Williams, who had testified at our first public hearing, to discuss his discovery that Ibogaine, in his words, is the most sophisticated drug on the planet based on its neuroregenerative qualities, as objectively demonstrated by the pre- and post-treatment MRI images of veterans who had received Ibogaine treatment for TB, traumatic brain injury, as well as post-traumatic stress. These images demonstrate that Ibogaine has the ability to regenerate brain tissue in a way that nothing has ever been known to do. We intended to bring Dr. Williams back, have him testify, and I am 100% persuaded that following that testimony, we would have had a successful commission vote. We have just discussed the fact that there are some significant and big money pharmaceutical interests which, by virtue of the reality of our treatment model, make margin by monetizing sustained human illness. These pharmaceutical interests have made a living within the corridors of power by hiring up brick-in-the-wall politicians who are willing to lend their hands to do their bidding. And in November, Attorney General Daniel Cameron had an unsuccessful run of governor. He was succeeded by a new guy who, though bore the Republican label, very much came at the issue of Ibogaine from a different angle and proved himself to be one of those hired hand, brick-in-the-wall politicians who was not going to allow the disruption of the existing order. I had a meeting with that Attorney General-elect at the time on December the 15th, and he made clear his displeasure with the fact that I had been an advocate for Ibogaine research, expressed his strong disagreement that any project like that should be within the Office of Attorney General, expressed his intention to go in a different direction, and that garnered my resignation. Had we had a man-to-man conversation up front about differences prior to that kind of meeting, and the request made that the project be abandoned in order for me to keep my job, the resignation still would have been given. I didn't take a job to hold a job, to be important, to hand out money, and to get my name in the paper. I took it to make a difference. and insofar as the experience that we had in Kentucky by way of the development of the realities of Ibogaine and the messaging of those realities to an uninitiated population can help provide inspiration and some instructive wisdom to other states as to how to make this happen where they're at, so that the individual states, with veterans at the forefront of leadership, can take on the job that the federal government refuses to do in terms of providing an opportunity for legitimate curative treatment for our people who desperately need it, then I am thrilled to death at the end result that was produced top to bottom.
But the difference of opinion between the two and them making you step down has now pushed us backwards.
I wouldn't say that it has pushed us backward, because at present there are 6 different states with whom I have contact with officials who are looking to replicate exactly what we did in Kentucky.
So just maybe Kentucky has slowed down.
Unfortunately,
was the person who took your place a DEA agent?
He is the former administrator of the DEA. And let me say this, my successor is a fine man. I know him individually. He participated in events that the commission engaged in the time that I was chair. He will be an exceptional administrator of that commission. And the individual that he works for will have to answer for his decisions as time plays out and reveals their folly.
Very good. Thank you, Bryan. We're going to discuss the Missouri side and what we have learned from everything that's taken place in Kentucky, and we'll do that with Senator Reeder as well as Representative McMullen. It'll be very interesting to take it from here. Tim, I know there's a lot more that we'll talk about when you come back to join us, but thank you very much, Bryan.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Some very powerful conversation today to try to advance for alternative treatments. And we were talking about the necessity to take care of our veterans, our first responders, so many levels of this. We've been talking with Tim Jensen. You've been listening to Bryan speak so eloquently about what was taking place in Kentucky. Now we're looking at Missouri. What can we do here? Let's go a little bit deeper into the veterans. You know, I mentioned 50 years ago, I was looking back at research and seeing that their ball was rolling, and then this war on drugs just really took it to a standstill. Are you frustrated by maybe the whispers that are out there, or the community that's out there that's hearing this saying, well, this is just getting people hyped up on drugs?
If you would ask me that question about 4 years ago, I would probably agree with you, right? But I think the fabric of our country is changing so rapidly, and the understanding of, really where we are in this conversation of opioid addiction, of depression, of, overprescribing of these, medications. I think Bryan put it extraordinarily well. We've created an industry that is keeping people sick by just keeping on administering them more and more medicine for the bottom line and the profitability of some of these manufacturers. So I think I'm more encouraged now than I've ever been in my professional life, in my adult life, and in this conversation of where are we going? What is the opportunity that's in front of us? We have something at our fingertips, that can make substantial change. And what has been interesting on the journey that I've been on this short period of time is going from state to state to state and learning of all of the representatives, the people that we're electing, and it's happening a lot more than I really will have ever believed on the Republican side, all across the nation, of them saying, you know what, this is an opportunity, right? And I think again, going back to some of the things that Bryan was saying, and was that this medicine not only is providing an opportunity for neuroregeneration, right? But it's also connecting people back to their spirit, to this bigger idea that there's something out there that's bigger than us, right? And there's a lot that goes into the mental health of an individual when they are separated from that spirituality, whatever it is, right? I don't think we're here to debate what the spirituality aspect of it all is, but there is a huge content to that, and something that we need to be recognizing. And I think that's where the Republican side of the House, is really like, there is this opportunity, and that is making it easier for them to get over the obstacles of it's just drugs, right?
I think one of the most powerful things that's been stated so far is Bryan's comment that it's not if this is going to happen, it's when.
Yeah.
And who wants to be on the forefront of saying, we are the state that got this to move through, and then the other states start doing the same thing. You mentioned that you're going around to other states. What are you hearing? If you can summarize from putting all the states together, what's the most positive thing you're hearing?
The most positive thing I'm hearing is, again, encouragement, right? You're seeing, bills getting advanced in states like California, right? Last session, the team that I've been working with on the Veteran Mental Health and Leadership Coalition has done some substantial work in the state of California. They got the bill all the way to Governor Newsom's desk on opportunities with psilocybin. Monumental. Right? Conversations that are happening in the state of Texas with the passage of 1802, which was something the former governor was championed to get it passed inside the legislation of the state. Those are the things that are really advancing these conversations across the United States, and you're seeing it happen almost in every state in the union, right? You've got Colorado that has passed decriminalization and descheduling, and now people are gaining access to these modalities, and the mental health is arguably changing, right? And there's opportunity, right? And that's where we need to be really focused. Is the days of beating our face against the wall and trying to figure out a solution when it's been in front of us the entire time, right? It's just been out of our reach because of federal regulation, and we always look back at these things, and hyperbaric chambers, right? Hyperbaric chambers was something that went to the wayside in after the 1960s, and now we're coming back to this and saying, oh my gosh, there is substantial opportunity of what hyperbaric chambers can do with a damaged brain, like CTE, IED explosions, right? You're getting oxygen-rich environments where the blood is flowing to places that has been damaged and causing neuro degeneration, right? And these modalities are having great impact. Red light therapy is another great modality of treatment, right? So what we need to be thinking about, rather than going to our doctors and saying, give me the next best drug, give me the next best ointment, or whatever it is, we need to be thinking about more holistic approaches of how we are addressing these problems, and what are we putting into our bodies, that potentially would lead us to that precipice of destruction and suicidal ideations.
Tim, for all the years I've been in broadcasting, it's always been so frustrating to me for all of what I guess we can consider more Western style medicine. It's what they know, it's their book knowledge. But if you look back decades, we're not talking about this as something that just, oh, hey, here it is, let's just try to push this through. These are things that have been around. If we go into other countries, I'm looking at Mexico and Canada, it's just the United States. Why do you think we are so behind when it comes to this?
Well, this is a hard question, and I don't want to offend people, right? But,
I don't either, but it's frustrating if this is existing.
Yeah, and I think the conversation needs to be had. I think the medical community, there's great people inside the medical community,
Absolutely.
And they are trying their very best to address some of these issues, and they are frustrated as well. But I think there is a very unhealthy relationship between these drug manufacturers and the doctors on the street, right? We talked a little bit earlier about the Suboxone situation, where you had 160,000 doctors at first, pre-2022, that were only able to prescribe these things. And then after lobbying efforts, now we got this proliferating to over 3 million doctors, right? And you talk to, there's situations that are occurring where there's kickbacks for doctors to earn money on the way that they're prescribing these things, right? We learn about the cancers and how some cancer doctors and oncologists are getting kickbacks for the types of treatments that they're providing, and how it's all coming from the pharmaceutical sides of these equations. And that's a big thing to navigate. That's a huge obstacle that we need to overcome. I think with the Western medicine, we've got into again, I will always go back to this, is we will look at profitability over the whole health of an individual, right? When the hospitals, and I used to work in hospitals as a union carpenter back in the day in Chicago, these are businesses. These are not places of health. When you go to the hospital, there's a good likelihood you're going to die, right? And not come out of that place. Now, why? Why is that? There's a lot of things that go into that, but these are places of business, and we need to really take a hard look at how we are addressing these things and how we are looking at the total health of our community.
And I think both of us want to stress there are remarkable things
Yes.
being done in Western medicine, but I've always believed that there should be a marriage between the holistic, homeopathic side, the functional side of medicine, with the traditional side of medicine, and seeing that all of these things exist and ask more questions. There's always seems like there's just a stopping point of, we don't know the long-term studies. So how do we ever get to a long-term study, right? Unless we're able to push these type of clinical trials through.
Absolutely. When you got situations where we're introducing GMO and all these other poisons into the food supply, right? And it's creating cancers inside the body, but we're treating the cancer. We're not treating the problem, right, which is what we're putting into our body. Yeah. That doesn't make sense, right? That is going to be something that we have to combat, right? Is yes, okay, we can treat the symptom at first, to manage it and get it into a position that we now start looking at what is causing the problem, mm-hmm, right? And we have a bigger conversation about that. We talk about, all the other types of poisons that are being introduced into the environment that we are, in the first world that we live in this modern society, it is dangerous as hell, if I may say so, right? We are living in conditions that it may seem as grand and people want to flock from around the world to live and have this experience in the United States. But at the same time, we are poisoning each other in record numbers, and we could do a better job.
Well, there's so much that's not discussed. I mean, we think about alcohol abuse. We think of any type of drug abuse that's out there. We think of overeating. We think of sugar addictions, all of these things that people just accept. I think there's too much acceptance in our world, don't you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. But it's what is marketed on television, right?
Branding.
It's what these children are consuming in the YouTube content, or the programming that is on television itself, right? It's consume, spend. We got to have that Coke. We got to eat those Cheetos, right? And we're not looking at all the dyes and all the poisons that are inside these things. And then when we are overweight and morbidly obese, and we're wondering why my diabetes, I have to get my leg cut off. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, there was a years of behavior that got us to this point, right? And that's where we need to be doing better, I think that's where, this idea of, again, looking at the bigger picture, zooming out from symptom-based, solutions to, what is the root problem, and how do we start making better decisions in our personal lives, mm-hmm, that are, one, in part and parcel, going to increase our mental health and and create better outcomes for us, our families, and the people that we influence. And
I think the biggest thing you have to continue to hear here is the root. Is going back to the root. What is the cause of it? Not reacting, trying to be proactive. And Tim and everybody that's on this panel is not saying, hey, let's just push this through. It is, let's do trials.
Yes.
Right? And that is what you need to be hearing here. We keep saying, I want you to always follow gruntstylefoundation.org, because they're doing remarkable things in the veteran community and our first responder community. Everyone who's suffering, and it used to be suffering in silence. I think the really wonderful thing that came out of the pandemic, Tim, is that people started talking about depression.
Yes.
And suddenly it wasn't the stigma of, oh, you're depressed, and oh, you're talking to this therapist, and oh, they're prescribing this drug for you. It is to discuss it and then say, what is out there for us? When we come back, we're going to talk about advancing opioid treatment options, continuing to talk with Tim, Senator Rader, Representative McMullen. But again, it's all about you and the community and being educated. So continue to follow, as I mentioned, gruntstylefoundation.org for all the latest.
Grunt Style Foundation is proud to be at the tip of the spear in supporting those who serve and our military community. Your donation directly supports food insecurity initiatives, transition and sustainment programs, mental health and wellness, and keeping our veterans from becoming homeless. You can be part of the solution and be the help a veteran or service member needs today.
I want to express my deepest appreciation to our esteemed guests, Bryan Hubbard, Senator Holly Thompson Rader, Representative Aaron McMullen, and Tim Jensen for joining us today and sharing their expertise and their perspectives on the potential of Ibogaine in treating opioid addiction. Your insights have not only shed light on this critical issue, but have also underscored the urgent need for innovative and compassionate solutions in addressing the opioid crisis within our veteran community. To our listeners, discover more episodes of Gaslighting, the Warfighter podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Your interest and your support in exploring these complex topics are what drive us to move forward with purpose. If you're inspired to learn more about the initiatives discussed today or you wish to contribute to the cause, please visit gruntstylefoundation.org. And for those hungry for more content that celebrates the bravery and the resilience of our nation's heroes, we encourage you to explore AmericanGrit.com and subscribe today. I'm Monica Adams, grateful for your time and your commitment to supporting our veterans. And until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and keep supporting those who've given so much for our freedom.